If I could ask for one more round of applause for this magnificent program. Just gonna give quick intros. Okay, so we have Lynn Peterson, who curated this program that we just watched. She is currently professor of media studies at Woodbury University in LA, and she's a film historian whose research focuses on the relationship between media and the environment. And then to her right, we have Pryce, who has been making experimental films, photographs, and optical objects since 1986. And she is currently a very generous and supportive co-program director at California Institute of the Arts. I can attest to that. Okay, and then we have Rachel Mayeri, who is an LA-based artist working at the intersection of science and art. Her videos, installations, and writing projects explore topics ranging from the history of special effects to the human animal. She is guest curator at the Museum of Jurassic Technology and professor of media studies at Harvey Mudd College. And then we have Cherlyn Hsing-Hsin, who is artist, filmmaker, and writer whose work is grounded in literature and the conceptual avant-garde. Cherlyn's creative activity often starts from a life event or curiosity concerning an anomaly in language or in the aging material world. Okay, and then hi, I'm Jheanelle, project director of Experimentations. Okay. Wow, okay, so Cherlyn's film is in the next program for those of you all who may or may not be staying, but you'll get some context for that. And excuse me while I just pull up my questions. Well, really, I just wanted to start off maybe, and so we're gonna definitely hear from all of the filmmakers in terms of the genesis of their projects and how they kind of arrived at them, but I'd love to start off, Jennifer, asking about your program, which is such an interesting program because you really have so much in terms of films that are somewhat topical, films that are abstract, films that you have varying modes and approaches, films that also, I think also the sonic kind of character of this program was so interesting in that we get films that are silent, films that are very audaciously kind of soundtracked and sonically characterized, but then also being able to end with analog films and even just hearing kind of the ambient noise of the projector and really having the ambient noise of the space that we're in. With all that being said, I just want to know how you kind of came to this project and how it kind of speaks to maybe your broader interest in research.
Yes, is this on? Hello. Yeah. Thanks, Jheanelle. Thank you to the audience for staying this long and for your patience here. I wanted to provide a variety, as you pointed out, and also feature some of our wonderful Los Angeles filmmakers. But roughly, there's a few ideas I'm working with. So one of the ideas is objectivity, and I'm really interested in some of these films that have these sort of like views of the camera looking down on natural history objects, animals, plants from above as though they're like on a lab table. I find that kind of questioning of objectivity and like exploration of films attempts to represent the material world, and then of course the failure of objectivity, very interesting. And I think there's something coming from feminist science studies, feminist STS, which I won't go into unless someone wants to hear about it, but basically sort of questioning the role of what scientific objectivity is striving to do and failing to do, right? And I'm sort of seeing some of that in contemporary trends in feminist filmmaking. So objectivity is one, natural history is another kind of operative category for me because I'm really interested in the history of natural history films going back to the silent period because I'm a silent film historian, but also in the ways that these trends get picked up by contemporary filmmakers. Charlotte, I think your film speaks to this tradition, so I'm eager to hear you talk about the making of your film, which was the first one that we saw. Let's see, other categories. Oh, lab work is one that I'm interested in as well. We see that a little bit in Bill Bassman's piece, which is that's the Wolf Release piece. It's actually a shorter film. It's a part of a feature film that Bill did called From Inside of Here that some of you might have seen because it's showed here. when he was here this past spring, I think it was, or summer. So there's a lot at play here, and it was super hard to put this together because there's so much great work being done, and I feel like it should all get more attention. So this was sort of a panoramic snapshot of some of the great contemporary feminist work that's being done.
Thank you, Jennifer, for kind of giving us this kind of overview. So Charlotte and Rachel, I'd love to hear just generally, and just general start, like how you all came to your projects, where the interest came from. We'll do all of y'all, but yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, the genesis of my project, I had been making a film. It's kind of an observational reverie that I would call about light, and I was very interested in qualities of light and how we understand light to be both particle and wave, and I was just fascinated by that. I had read Lucretius, but for this film, I particularly was questioning, when has light really changed my life? When has the experience of light or the sentience of light changed my life? And it drew me back to a very kind of pivotal moment, I think, in my childhood when I was 9, and I lived in a small town in Sussex. And it was dark at night. It was very, very dark at night, and I was coming back from like a Girl Scouts, and I was about 9, and I looked up at the sky, and I saw the stars, and for the first time I felt that kind of moment of like, I'm really, really a small thing in this world, and I'm alone. Like, I'm absolutely alone. You know, even though I was part of a family, I think that that's kind of a pivotal moment we all have at some point in our development. But that it was also an exciting revelation to some extent. And so I built on that moment of being scared and also a little bit enticed into the unknown. So that was really, you know, I wanted to capture that feeling again of that experience of light. So, you know, my work it sort of bridges natural history and fiction, so they're natural history fictions. And so I started to write a story about that, and that's how my film came to be.
A very different story over here, but I enjoyed yours. I came to Alice and Jolly having worked on a series of films about primates, monkeys, and apes. And she had written the textbook on primate behavior, and it was hilarious. She had a picture of Nixon next to a picture of a chimpanzee, and they're both doing display behavior. And she really leads you into the, you know, comparisons in a very open way and inviting way to get into science. And having made films about non-human primates, it was, you know, hard to avoid the amazing stories of the people who study the apes and monkeys. And there was the fabulous leaky ladies who were celebrities, but there was this entire, you know, kind of nerdy academic field. But they were very, very funny people and very, really interesting to hang out with. And they have their own stories about they're doing field research, so they're world travelers, and they have their acute sense of social observation about each other. So they'll start ranking people in terms of their hierarchies at a conference. You know, looking at, it's kind of like being in middle school, because they say the highest ranking person is the one who's being looked at by the most amount of people. And so they'll look at a room like that, which is sort of annoying. But yeah, Alice and Jolly was, I think, like, I wish I had a mother like that who was just so, she's very erudite. She knew everything about natural history, but she was also kind of like not heroic and well, you know, just down to earth and warm, and so I like this kind of like, could I shift the story about scientists to something that gave me a feeling of like an ancestry of, instead of being like father science describing us human beings as objects, instead could we be with the scientists narrating our origin story with other primates? And that seemed like an empowering move to do with Alice and Jolly.
And if I could say a little bit about the program that's after this, in which Cherlyn's film features in. With the program that's next, I think I was kind of thinking of it in terms of, I don't know, two different poles. One that are really questioning how our bodies function, how we're socialized to kind of live within our bodies, how that kind of shows up in gender, but also thinking about the kind of just, I don't know, the more personal, embodied aspects of our bodies. And I really think that Cherlyn kind of represents, in some ways, the latter. So just a little quick line about that, but genesis of your project, where did it come from?
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, because I was worried that I'm gonna say something that you haven't seen. Well, okay. So the story goes. So the film started with this reunion, my reunion with my mother in 2013 when I was back to Taiwan for a short visit. At the time I was studying arts. And I was already like around late 20 or early 30, and then I never actually knew my mother as a person. I knew her, from the name and from my birth certificate, something like that. And so the first time, I got to know her, and that got me started with the documentary, which is, predecessor of this film called Close-Ups. So I used a lot of photographs I took at the time during the trip with her. But then, after that, when I was about to return to the US, and she gave me a dress that she said, oh, this dress is my 20s. It's like this kind of classical, very formal gown. And so she gave that to me because she said, oh, I can't wear this anymore because this, is very fit to my 20s body. And I think your body built this really, you took from me, you look similar like me, you have the same height and also the same body. And so she gave that to me, as a memory keeper. And then I took that back with me to the US. And when I look at that gown, of course, I won't wear that out right now because it looks really like 100 years ago. But it's very beautiful. And so I put it in my drawer, and I was like, I'm not gonna wear this, and maybe after 5 years or 10 years, I will forget about this. And so I want to keep the memory. And so I was thinking that, instead of storing in a drawer, what would be a better way to keep the memory? And also, to keep, kind of memorize this relationship or this life experience both my mother and I had. This very long kind of separation. And so I just took that gown, and she said to me, my mom, when she gave this gown, she said, for this 30 years, I always feel that there was a hole in my body, and now I finally feel that hole can disappear. And I was like, oh, that image just stuck with me the whole time, and so I cut a hole in that gown that she gave me. And some people will be like, what? Did you cut a hole in the one thing that your mother left to you? And I was like, yes, but I didn't ruin it. It's not a destroy, because I think it's actually a better reproduced memory of that relationship. And so I make that in the film. And this film, I was really trying to reconnect this experience I didn't have with her, and I was trying to recall the memory that wasn't exist, or it was long lost. The memory that I was in her belly, or the memory that before she left me, which that was when I was 2, so I had almost no memory with her. And so during this film, I was trying to reproduce that life experience, which is the time in her belly, and this connection, or this quasi-connected relationship, between the inner world and the world outside that she is experiencing.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, Cherlyn. And Charlotte, with how you kind of talked about how you came to your project and this, looking up in the stars, looking up in the sky. I mean, I think that's an experience that so many of us had, and so existential and so kind of totalizing. And it's scary to me, but you said it was kind of intriguing. But I wonder how you get to kind of this relationship to light, as well as your relationship to kind of investigating photographic practices that show up in your work, which is kind of exacting, right? But how it links to this kind of this nugget of something more existential or something more totalizing, or if that doesn't make sense, anything that feels like makes sense for you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the question. And I meant to thank Jennifer for including me in this program before. So yes. How this connects to the photographic quality of my film? Yes, well, I think I take a lot of inspiration really from self-taught naturalists, and particularly sort of outsiders. Someone like Opal Whiteley has been hugely important to me. She was writing as a child, really, about the natural world around her, and I like the idea of having questions that are free from the academia, so that you're free to ask the initial question, the big question, without feeling like you have to answer it with Google or something. That you can answer that for yourself. And so, my question was, so how is this, in a way, how is that starlight affecting me? How does starlight affect me? And then I was thinking about that, perhaps reading about that, thinking about the age of the light that was falling. No one really talks about the age of light. It seems like how old is the light that is touching you? And so these things are really intriguing to me in a very non-linear academic way. And so I just embraced those thoughts and began thinking about light as photons, as wave and particle, and finding resonances in sort of the substances around me that could conjure up or could make those kinds of qualities. So I love early films by Méliès, and I admire his ability to make things from nothing, drawings really, these extraordinary other worlds. And so it was important for me that I use humble materials, things that are in my garden. And so I began to think a lot about the kind of the quality of light, and I was looking at a lot of early photographic records, sort of first images of things that the eye had not yet seen or were beyond sight, because I find those early photographs from the late 1800s or the mid 1800s to the late 1800s to be have somehow a beauty to them, but also they hold the fascination of first sight, I think, of seeing something for the first time. Which was always at the back of my mind, to have that excitement of imagery, of aesthetics. And I hand process my films, and so I have this kind of quality of 16mm, which is hand processed and a little bit disintegrated in some ways, and I began to think about how, oh, if this was almost a documentary of this light falling from the sky and becoming this substance, because there is such a thing as a star jelly, or poudre, which is the Welsh name for the rot of stars, of stuff that falls from stars. It's actually probably not the stuff that falls from stars, but it's some creature in the ground. There's some mystery as to what it really is, but there have been notices of this substance for many, many millennia. So yes, I began to think about, what if this was sort of a little bit of a documentary about that, and would the film itself be affected by that light too? So I wanted to have that kind of quality of the image being, having responded to that light. And then I began to look at substances, and ferrofluid came to mind. Perhaps I shouldn't tell you about that, but it's the astronaut. It was designed to be used in space as fuel for rockets, and so it is used with a magnet, and it behaves both as a particle and a wave magnificently. So that was perfect. And then I've been thinking about the impact of light on substances, and my husband, who's up there, had built a Cherlyn camera, and I had had my eye on it for some time, and then began to realize that those images of these kinds of sparks was something that I wanted to explore and bring into the film. And so those are images which are made through giving a little bit of electricity to an object, which then creates a spark, which then creates an impact or an image of light effectively on a photographic plate or paper. So I began using those images because I felt that they were the right ones for me. And then, yes, I have that kind of bookended, as it were, with a kind of an introduction, and that a fiction really, which is to be pulled out and to be pulled away, that there is a lasting impact of the starlight in some ways. So, yes.
I just wanted to offer maybe a little connecting historical context between your work and Rachel's work, actually, because I see your work very much. You mentioned Méliès, and it's in the sort of silent film tradition, and you mentioned Opal Whiteley, and there's this tradition of nature study in science, which was feminized in the late 19th and early 20th century, where women would teach children about nature by taking them outside. And this still goes on, right? Of course, kindergartens and elementary schools. So in this model, you learn by experiencing nature. You go out into the wilds, and I see the woods and, maybe in your yard, your backyard. I see your work as sort of picking up on this tradition, and it really resonates with that in a nice way, but it was then marginalized by laboratory science and hard science that comes in the teens and 20s, and then you have, in the nature history kind of film tradition, a series of films that then come up that are popular science films that are not really lab films, but they're sort of using popular images of science, moving away from the natural history tradition. So there's this feminization of a form of knowledge that I think that cinema picks up on very nicely. So then, Rachel, when you show these female primatologists in your film in a great way by animating them, which I love, I think it's hilarious and really a great way to get us to kind of relate to them, you are dealing with historically like one of the first generations of women scientists who were taken seriously as professionals by hard science. And so one of the things this program, I'm interested in what you guys think, does is sort of gets us to think about what film can do about science that science can't do because it's too narrow, and yet the films are asking very different questions than the science would do, right? Of course. So that's all a way of like segueing from the natural history tradition to the kind of scientist tradition of these female primatologists that you feature in your film.
Is that a question?
No.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the careers of women scientists are really important for what becomes science. So those voices which weren't heard before in the field of primate science became really important because they coincided with the interest in the female role of non-human primates, where before it was the, male aggression, patriarchy, violence, and competition, and selfishness, or, tooth and claw kind of animality. And in the 60s, early 60s, when these women hit the scene, they started looking at, nurturing mothers, collectivity, sociality, and all of the difficulties of getting along as a group. So they did change science, but they would say, this first generation would say, was not because we're female or because we're feminists, it's the science. And they're kind of an interesting group because they're the only scientists who have done a critique of themselves, and they invited people from STS, Science Studies, to come to their conference. And they actually thought about their own, representations of gender, their total lack of equity in terms of like local people in the field, and how problematic that was. And they're also really invested in conservation. They had to be political. Unlike some other scientists, their subject was dying off, so they had to be involved. So I found that to be a really interesting nexus. As a film, it was intended to be an installation, so that's why it's all talking heads. There's no B-roll. I sort of got in to this project with my, as usual, it's kind of like half-conscious script where I made interviews with the scientists, and then I had to ask them, would you mind if you were represented by a monkey or a prosimian in the final, because I hadn't really thought about how I was going to use their voices. So that was a big problem. I'm not sure how it really works to have them as monkeys. I could see some problems of how I cast the monkeys for these different women. But I kind of like how talky it is. I liked listening to their voices. I enjoyed interviewing them, and what I found interesting about them was how they managed their grief with the extinction or near extinction of the immense and breathtaking biodiversity of Madagascar. From the flora to the fauna. I mean, it's just tragic that the forests are, most of which have been burnt down to make grassland for cattle, and so these really unique creatures in the world are having no place to live, and so hearing how all of these people are very very proactive, very community oriented in their conservation work, we're kind of managing was interesting to me. But that was interesting that you could make a connection because Charlotte's work is so poetic, and mine was so literal and discursive. So it was really fun to see what variety and how inclusive you could be in this program. But really appreciate the programming.
I have one more question for Cherlyn, and then definitely want to hear what y'all are thinking or interested in. And Cherlyn, you talked a little bit about this earlier, but we really do get, just kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not foils. My brain is kind of having a moment, but you shared with us something deeply personal in terms of how, where this film came from, but then, the type of imagery that you're using obviously kind of take us as a place that's a little bit more clinical, a little bit, in terms of medical imagery. I wonder what, how you struck the balance in what's being represented and how that kind of related to this film that is about memory with imagery that is kind of, that is more clinical.
Thank you. That's a great question. Yeah, the film does deal with memory, but like from not cover, but looking through or utilizing like technological or some kind of technical memory, or like this object I talked about, this gown is also serves as some kind of object or objective memory. So there are a lot of memory and also like conscious, subconscious memory in myself. Physical, the memory in the muscle, memory in my organ, but I don't have those memories consciously just because I wasn't ever reminded by someone like my mother who was very intimate and also was involved in that part of my life, and so I was kind of losing those memories. And so in this film, I was not trying to, not only just trying to reproduce the memory, but also I think there are like symbolic technique I'm using because I was learning camera obscura technique, and so I handmade this, this camera obscura, this technology or this device that from like early photography history. And so when I was making that object, I was thinking, wow, like there's a hole, and then the world will be reflected, and then will be upside down, through the hole. And that just reminded me of like when I was a baby in a belly, that maybe is the world I was seeing. But I didn't, this is symbolic, but I just sort of kind of had that connection. And so I use camera obscura to recreate or to channel that life experience when I was in my mother's belly, to interweaving the world that is the reality we see.
Thank you. I think I should pass the mic back, but time for questions, comments. I don't think anyone wants to. I'll run it back. And then maybe we can do a pass around.
Thank you. That was really fun. The combination was very interesting. I was wondering in the ant film, so we rule, I think. I think it's the opening shot is the grasshopper. I was wondering if any of you have any interpretation of why that was in there, or what that made you think of.
Sure. Catherine Chalmers makes all her work on location in Costa Rica with the insects that are there and the plants that are there. So I assume it was there. However, tell me if that's incorrect. That's actually, I think she's the only filmmaker in this program I don't personally know. So I haven't spoken with her about her.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you think.
I think it's just that was there. And if you want to do like an analysis of it, like maybe it was sort of the ringleader, the big, insect, and then we have the sort of worker bee, except they're ants, so worker ants coming through. And, I see that film as sort of a riff on the BBC nature documentary, but obviously she's making very clear the amount of manipulation involved in those kinds of films. We might know that they are manipulated, and even BBC docs, they now have making of, as a part of them, right? So it's a fascination people have, but she's sort of playing that aspect of it up for humorous effect.
She actually made one of her wildlife films in her apartment in New York.
Oh, that one, Safari. That's
Safari,
right. Yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, it was a great combination of films. Thank you for that. Well, my first comment is about like how every film was so different, yet like I felt that I was looking at every tiny species of like particle in the air, like an animal, like a living thing, even if it was not living, and I could like wander around their systems or their imaginations within, like, I don't know. I don't know if ants have imagination, but I always wonder about that. I have a question for any of you about the film. How a sprig of fear will replace a theater. Well, how did you feel about the movement of the camera going vertically instead of horizontally? Like, does that create a crazy effect in your mind?
Astrid, can you say the last thing in your question? Does it create what?
Does it create like a crazy effect? Like, how do you feel?
Astrid, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, how do you feel, Astrid?
Yeah.
Socratic.
How did that?
I don't know, like, because it was like immersive, but at the same time, I was wondering why it didn't went like horizontally. Like, that was probably a choice. And I'm wondering that since you as the makers also like make decisions of like, oh, I'm gonna shot this in this way, or I'm gonna use this camera, or I'm gonna put monkeys instead of people. And every decision I think like creates like an effect on the people, but I wanna like know you as the makers looking at other film, how do you feel about that? Connected to your film, probably.
I can answer that. I mean, I think, you know, when you're looking down, it's the same movement as your eyelid going closing, and it's very mesmerizing. So you're kind of constantly doing this, and it pulls you into a trance in some ways. So for me, it was against the objective view that I think Jennifer has talked about, and one which kind of induces you to, or invites you to fall into kind of texture and form and not be analytical. So that would be my answer.
That's an interesting one, and I was just thinking of the body plan of you know, of primates, and also of all the leaves and insects that, you know, following the vertebrae kind of gives you a symmetry and a structure that is very vertical, but then, you know, how do you fit it into the square space of the frame? So that was an interesting choice for.
Well, I think I asked Anna about this question before, and she said that when she shot it, she actually used the down shooter. So when the animal was lying on the desk, on the table, and she was doing like very carefully examining like that, and so, you know, this and she had to kind of move the camera along this movement. So she just, you know, was interested in this movement, and also because of the insects, the body, probably this just the form that makes this this more interesting to, I mean, for her, the composition in a frame.
Just really quickly, this is a bit of a reductive answer, but I think you're onto something here. I feel like what film does for us is it gets us to ask these formal and aesthetic questions, and yet all of these filmmakers are interested in science in some way. So the reductive answer is that like the horizontal track or pan is more territorializing because it follows like a horizon line and it's more about landscape, whereas the vertical is, I love your idea of the eyes closing, or also the vertebrae, you know, or trees, right? There's maybe some different kind of power hierarchy there, but then I would reject that because it's too reductive. But I think just the fact that these films open up these kind of formal questions for us tells us that they are achieving different goals than what science is going for, obviously. And I wonder what the scientists would have to say about any of this, or maybe they wouldn't care.
Follow-up question about that. Can everybody hear me without the mic? Yeah.
It's being recorded.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. You said at the beginning that you were using these categories kind of capriciously, like feminism and science and technology, and I was thinking as I was watching sort of how these films are feminist and what does that mean? I guess it's a very general question, but that like, are all of these filmmakers explicitly engaging in feminist topics, or are the filming devices, or like the kind of formal questions, like are we calling those feminist, or how is that category kind of being mobilized in this?
Yeah, excellent question. So, I mean, the trick with talking about feminism is to not essentialize or reduce it, right? So I would say just basic table setting is like feminism is just opposed to patriarchy and in favor of equality for all genders and sexes. And then I would include, you know, inclusive, trans inclusivity and non-binary inclusivity. So it's basically a way of just saying, like, if you're opposed to patriarchal hierarchies of power, you can be feminist, right? Does that dissolve the idea of sexuality? Maybe a little bit, but I think it's better to be more inclusive than not. So then to say all these filmmakers, are they feminist or not? I'm sure there's many feminisms, right? Everybody does their feminism differently. So I would say probably some are, probably some aren't. I like to include women in what I write about and in programming because they're often overlooked just because patriarchy, because we still live in a patriarchy, right? But I would say what interests me actually is that those scientists were like disavowing themselves as feminists. And I think that's what's different now, is that, like, you know, among my students, I feel much less resistance to saying, oh, I'm a feminist, fine, right? Like there's maybe, but I'm generalizing. So I don't know if I don't like to call people out either, like, are you a feminist or not? You know, they used to do that in like the second wave feminist era, and then it was a whole thing for those filmmakers, you know, Carolee Schneemann or whoever, to say like, I am or am not a feminist, you know, and I think that is a question of a different generation, right? So we have new things now.
Would you like an answer?
Do you feel like that? Or there any
I
other
would
elements of
love
your
to
question?
hear, you know, anyone that feels compelled to respond.
I can respond just a little bit. I mean, I am eternally grateful for that first wave of feminist filmmakers who are women who set the stage. My own teacher, Babette Mongolt, was an amazing trailblazer, continues to blaze. And I feel that has given me the ability or the permission to not over-address that in my work, but to be able to embrace what's natural to me. And so, I mean, I think in this film, there's always some little element in my work, in all of my pieces, that addresses a female experience. And in this one, I was conscious right at the beginning, where we have the tops that are spinning, and then they're on a path, and then there's one star that veers, and that's kind of where I stand, I think, veering slightly off, and that would be my position, always. Yeah.
Any last question? Oh, well, actually, I'm sorry. I remember I'm open. But maybe I could just end, maybe Jennifer, I mean, I don't know if you would have answered this question, but I feel like anytime I actually, the day of, watch a program that I put together, there's new kind of connections and things that came up for me, and especially getting to talk to folks and having questions from an audience. I, make multiple additional meanings that I didn't before. So I'm wondering if any of that happened to you as you watched it.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, definitely. I think I thought it worked really well together, and I was kind of surprised by the variety. Maybe I didn't totally realize that when I put it together. And exactly what you said about the sound. It was really nice to hear it in here. Even I've always liked silent films with the projector sound going. I think that's such an important ambient element. So that was cool too. And then seeing stuff with an audience is great. I've watched all these on my laptop many times and written about them, but audiences bring films alive, right? I always say when I teach, like, cinema is film plus audience and the meeting of the two, right? So it's not cinema when you're at home looking at your laptop. So just kind of the activation of the film sphere was cool. Yeah, like when everybody plugged their ears during the in ocularum piece, I was like, okay, cool. I bet Anna would probably like that.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.